There, it's okay.
Ask us anything about childhood trauma, and we'll bring the same warm, loving energy to you through your screen. Mended light.
These are not rehearsed, just in case you were wondering. I was just hugging him.
Ask us anything. Right. So we put out into our YouTube community the topic, when it comes to working through childhood trauma, what is your single greatest challenge? And we're going to address it the best we can here, the questions that were asked. So let's dive in.
I think it's difficult identifying trauma because there are many things from childhood that on paper sound traumatic, but that I don't feel traumatized me. So I don't know if there's something I need to address. Okay, so I have some thoughts.
They're not. You're tougher than the rest of us. Go ahead.
2 thoughts. My question is, one, you might have a very resilient personality type, right? Mm-hmm. Where it literally just didn't affect you. Like, I know with my siblings, like, I have a more resilient personality type, and I have siblings that are more sensitive. They're healers. I'm not a healer. Yeah. And healer is like the lowest. And if you don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to personality
By
types.
the lowest, she means the worst. What do you mean the lowest?
My natural ability to show up as a healer.
Ranking your personality types, healer is the least inside of you.
The least inside of me. Okay. I've had to put a lot of effort into developing it.
Notice how I quickly took offense? Healer trait. Woo! Go ahead.
And if you don't know what we're talking about when we say healer or other personality types, check out our marriage problems video where we talk about it, or join our membership site and take the full course. It's fun.
Yep, here we go.
But the healer personality type is very nurturing and loving, and by nature also very sensitive.
Yeah.
And so that's not me at all. And so my siblings and I could go through the exact same experience, and it would be wounding for them, and it wasn't wounding for me. And that's not because they were overly sensitive. It's because that's who they were. Right? And so I would question, one, is it something that you were genuinely not wounded by? Or did you have to show up in such a strong way to survive, yeah. Right?
I'm doing what I have to do to survive.
And are there layers, did you put your armor on? Did you put your mental and emotional armor on to survive? And are you so used to surviving that you haven't taken it off?
Yeah.
And so that's the question I would pose. But if you genuinely are like, no, I can show up in a very emotionally in-tuned way, and those things were not traumatic for me, that's great.
Yeah. But if you had to detach in order to handle them, so it doesn't show up in the way of, well, I'm spiraling, or I'm feeling intense grief, or I'm feeling intense fear or anxiety, that doesn't mean that you didn't experience a trauma. It may mean that your response is now that you've shut yourself off emotionally, or that you're distancing yourself from people and it just looks different from you. So as you're saying, identify, okay, was I really not affected, or was I affected differently than maybe what I'm looking for? The thing I find the hardest to fight is the feeling that I can't ever fully be happy or relaxed, because if I do, something bad will happen. And that's
something you relate to a little bit more.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's something here. Look, I love to be happy and I love to be relaxed, and I hate it when that is intruded or infringed upon. And what happens, of course, is when you let your guard down, it hurts worse. It feels like I was letting myself to be in a place of peace and hope, and then that was ripped from me, right? That's the feeling. Whereas if I don't allow myself to feel peace and hope, if I don't allow myself to be content, there's nothing to rip away. I'm already miserable. You can't take that away from me. My response to that is, life happens. Hardship happens. And if you're waiting until there's no hardship or no potential of loss or danger to feel happy, you'll spend your entire life unhappy with your guard up to keep yourself from feeling unhappy.
And then your mental and emotional well-being and stability is not based on you and who you are. It's based on the circumstances around you in your life. Yes. And as much as we all want to control the circumstances around us, we can't.
Right.
We cannot control everything around us.
In control.
The question for me is, what are you building your foundation on? And is it stable?
Yes.
And that is absolutely someone who has experienced trauma, especially childhood trauma. We are looking to do that. We're looking to control our environment so that we can feel safe.
Yeah, and there's something that Tom Cruise said about doing stunts, which is don't be safe, be competent. right? The fact is, life is unsafe, physically or emotionally. And the more we try and keep ourselves safe, the more we cut ourselves off from life. Far better to be prepared. If you're prepared, you won't be afraid. So how do I get to a place where I can relax and be happy and enjoy life, even though something bad might happen? Is preparation. If I feel like I'm prepared for things, if I have, and frankly, I lean on you a lot for this, but like, if we're prepared for things, we're not afraid.
Well, and so we all need safety. It's what we're putting our safety into, right?
Yeah.
And the trauma reaction is to try and control the environment around us and to create safety in that. And really, the safety is in healing our own wounds and building that strong foundation in ourselves and creating a safe mental, emotional, and physical environment for us to live in and to heal those wounds, right? And not to be stuck in that trauma response.
I saw this movie one time.
Just one time.
And there's
is
a
all it
character
took.
who keeps repeating to another, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. And then the thing that the other character was worried about happens.
Tell me, has anyone ever believed you? You told him not to worry?
Well, my philosophy is that worrying means you suffer twice.
And so I think the best we can do is prepare ourselves as much as possible and then live our lives. Because we also don't want to have those moments of enjoyment stolen from us because we live in fear, right?
And that's why we do what we do, right? Because there is so much trauma in the world. And a lot of us, we want to heal from it. We don't know how. And we try, and it's not working. So we stuff the emotion. And it feels like a mess we don't know how to work through, right? And that's why Mended Light does what it does. That's why we have our innate healing program, is to be your support and your guide. If we're a fit for doing that, we'd love to chat with you. We'd love to have you meet for a 15-minute free call with one of our therapists.
So go to mendedlight.com and do that.
Can you talk about self-loathing caused by childhood trauma? I'd like to know some work I could do to grow out of self-loathing.
I can speak to this, and let's address what trauma is, because in his book, Real Love and Post-Childhood Stress Disorder, Dr. Greg Baird talks about we are too narrow in our definition of trauma. We define trauma as loss of life or limb, right? There's a threat of loss of life to us, or we see someone die, or we see someone go through something dangerous, or we're in a dangerous experience, like a physically dangerous, life-threatening situation. And we categorize that as trauma, assault, abuse. We categorize all that as trauma. And I don't think he uses the term micro-traumas. I think it came to me while I was reading his book. But living in the world, we encounter a series of micro-traumas. And if you think about it, the damage to your shoulder, if I give you one really hard punch versus 200 softer punches,
Right.
They add up to the same amount of bruising, right? And I didn't experience what I would call childhood trauma with a capital T. I didn't lose anybody. I wasn't in a life-threatening situation. But I was bullied mercilessly for about 8 years, every single day of school. I was teased, I was taunted, and my role in the food chain of my elementary school was the kid to be picked on so the others could bond over making me cry.
Bullying isn't cool. Bullying is lame.
Well, and that would be hard for anyone. But with your personality type, that peer rejection was trauma. It was devastating.
It was. And my personality type as a healer is the reason they teased me, because they could get such a big reaction out of me. Because it devastated me time after time.
And I
after
see
time.
the dynamics, especially for boys and men, where that healer personality type is not as common and it's not socially acceptable for men and boys. It is that.
Yeah.
Like you do.
What a sissy.
Yeah.
Right? What a pansy. And then I would come home, and my older brother, who was 8 years older than me, who was a very great man, and who I have a very close friendship with now, he was a terrible child. He's a good man, but he's a terrible child and not a great teenager. And he would physically assault me as part of his bullying, and verbally assault me as part of his bullying. And I was just desperate for love and acceptance. And what I learned from that, like the cumulative experience of that at my core, was that I was unlovable. Is that who I actually was? Because I tried to put myself out there, and people would reject and tease and taunt and bully. And I learned that who I am at my core is unlovable. And I grew to really hate myself.
Well, that was the conclusion you came to.
Yeah.
Like it was the false belief. It wasn't actually true.
It wasn't actually true.
But in your childhood mind, that was the false belief. And the conclusion you came to, you internalized that judgment.
And
Then you carried it with you into adulthood.
and maybe some of you can relate to this. My mom loved me, and she was very good to me. And I convinced myself, well, that's because she's my mom and she has to. And I look back at it now as an adult and I see, no, my mom was one of the few with the maturity to really see me and to see my value and see my worth and accept me, right? And the people who were giving me a hard time, I don't know why I listened to their opinions. Point is, these little micro traumas added up to a severe amount of self-loathing that has followed me for decades into my life, has fed into some of my worst behaviors, has fed into my dishonesty, has fed into projecting the best version of myself or presenting in ways that I think people would accept me, and hiding, right? Hiding who I really was or what I was really struggling with out of fear that it's unlovable, my darkest parts, right? And what helped me and has helped me is to find. The book talks about wise men and women, wise people, right? The book doesn't address non-binary. So wise people who are loving and accepting and recognize one simple fact. And this one simple fact helped undo over time a lot of that damage, which is that everybody has worth, that everybody has value. Why? Because every single person is a combination of strengths and weaknesses. And if I look at others and I say that they have value and worth, even with their weaknesses, then I have to acknowledge the same about myself. There's nothing that sets me apart where they are worthy of love and somehow I am not, because we're just all groupings of strengths and weaknesses.
Know that you are worthy.
How do you work through self-loathing? By telling the truth about yourself. By having the courage to recognize that some people will have prejudices and biases that will lead them to reject you when you tell the truth about yourself. And instead of taking that personally, just recognizing that's okay, those aren't my people anyways.
Those are not the wise men and women that are here to support me. Those are the individuals that are struggling with their own journey. And I'm going to let them struggle with their own journey, not in my inner circle.
Not in my inner circle. And that I could be my own wise man, that I could start there, that I could see all of me and love all of me and accept all of me, and that I could work on improving me, but that didn't mean I had to hate the parts that I was trying to improve. And that type of love allowed me to start giving it to other people, and that I could surround myself with people like Alicia, who I could be real and honest with, and she would be accepting of it. The thing she wasn't accepting of was dishonesty, because that violates trust. But the thing that I was most afraid of, which is if she actually saw me, she would reject me, didn't happen, right? And so that is the power of this, and that's how you work through this.
I love it. Conflict avoidance. I'm always coming up with excuses not to ask people to do things, especially roommates or people I live with and or spend a lot of time with, because I'm afraid of hostile reactions. So I think that's saying I don't ask people for things that I need.
Yeah.
People who are a part of my life, because they're going to get upset. They're going to reject me. It's not going to be okay.
Yeah. And that may be based on experience.
Well, I'm quite sure it is, because we don't just make things up about ourselves, right? Quite often we come to the awareness that we show up in life in a certain way, but we don't take it a step further and go, why do I do this? Why do I believe this way about myself, right? And if we do that, we generally are like, oh, well, see, I had this experience in childhood where I was bullied mercilessly, and then I internalized that trauma, and I came to these conclusions, right? Most likely, they experienced an environment in childhood or otherwise where it wasn't safe to have needs, or it wasn't acceptable to have needs, or you were rejected because you had needs, or expressing an opinion or a perspective, right?
Right.
And so it became a coping mechanism to not have needs, or to not ask for things, or to not express those needs or those perspectives or beliefs. And so first step is to always then be in a safe environment, because you don't ever want to try and work through a false belief when you're still in an unsafe environment.
With people who feed into that false belief.
Right. So if you were still in an environment of being teased and rejected, you wouldn't be like, oh, I'm going to show myself to you and expect to build trust and love and acceptance.
Right.
Right? Like that's
Well, and if my roommate, and I can't get out of that environment for now because that's where I live and that's my roommate, I just wouldn't do the work in that apartment with that roommate. We're not saying
Right.
wait until you're out of that situation. It's just
Right.
don't practice it there.
So when you're working through a trauma, you have to, first, always recognize that you need a safe environment to work through it in. If you don't have a safe environment, and I'm not talking about just physically, I'm talking about emotionally also, because it is the lack of emotional safety which leads to most of our trauma triggers. And so make sure your environment is safe and become aware of maybe your false beliefs, right? The things that you believe in your heart, but mentally you know aren't true. And then find those wise men and women in your life to take a step into vulnerability with and to ask them for things. Or when you're struggling, say, I'm struggling, like I want to ask you for this, but I feel really uncomfortable. And I totally relate to this because I grew up in a household where it was very quid pro quo. So this for that. So if I do something for you, then I'm going to ask you for something. And I'm never going to ask you for something unless I'm doing something for you. So it's always this score. So I can't ask for something just because I need it. Like I have to earn that ability to ask first, right? And it is so highly, highly, highly uncomfortable for me to ask someone that I don't know to do something for me, and I can do nothing in return for them.
It's okay to ask for help.
So funny story, my oldest son is going to a youth camp with a cousin, and it's the other family's side of the family where that youth camp is taking place, right?
Yeah.
So it's with a cousin, but and then his extended family that's there isn't my family. And so we planned this trip, it was fun, and then I realized like, someone's got to pick my son up from the airport and take him to this youth camp and get him back and do just all these little things. And I was like,
Who can I ask? Holy crap.
I was like, I can't do this. Well, so my cousin.
Sorry, son, you're not going.
So my cousin, she was like, oh, I'll just, ask my husband's family. Like, they'll be fine. I'm sure they'll be okay with it. And if someone had asked me to do the same thing, I would have been like, totally. The more the merrier. Yeah, don't even worry about it. We'd love to pick him up and make sure he has lunch, a sack lunch before he gets dropped off for a week. And we'll totally pick him up, because their kids are going too. We'll pick them up with our kids and we'll take them back to the airport. Like, we'll take care of them. It's fine. We'd love to have them. That's my perspective of serving someone else. But I am so uncomfortable when it comes to asking someone else for that.
Because you feel like you can't bank on them to do that.
Well, it's not a matter of banking on them. It's like, how could I possibly ask someone for something and I can't do anything for them in return, right?
Because of the quid pro quo nature.
Because of the quid pro quo nature. And I was so close to being like, I'm sorry, we're canceling all of it. Even though my son and his cousin were really looking forward to it. And I was like, I've got to work through this, and I can express gratitude and I can express appreciation, and I can ask them, hey, I really appreciate this. Is there something I can do for you? But it needs to be okay for me just to ask for things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and sometimes you will get those hostile reactions.
Yeah.
So the question to ask yourself is that because of me? No, 100% no. It's because of this person, where they're at in life and what they're dealing with. I look at the process of looking for wise people to bring into your life, like checking stalls in a public bathroom. Like, you just keep going until you find one that's ready for you, right? You don't.
I've never heard this comparison, but it's going to stick with me forever.
If it's not ready for you, you're just like, this isn't my spot, right? These aren't my people. And it doesn't mean that you're wrong for looking for having the need, right? You just find the one that's ready, the one that's prepared. And this is very hard if you're a man, because men's rooms are disgusting. So yeah, that's my analogy. Would you like us to do another video on childhood trauma? If so, put your questions below in the comments for us to answer. We have a whole playlist of Ask Us Anything for you to peruse. That's going to come up right here at the end. And if you want to go deeper in these deep dives and actually have more personal, real-time interaction with us, we do live hour-long monthly Q&As on our membership site, which is 50% off right now.
And we always answer every single question that gets asked. So that's a fun thing too.
Yes, on those ones we do. Here it's just such a volume. So until next time, folks, keep shining. We need your light.